Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
We live in the era of AI. The technologies many of us saw for the first time in sci-fi movies as kids are now the technological experiments that will define humanity for generations to come. In some ways, that's an exciting concept. How does nature versus nurture apply to machine learning, and what exactly are the boundaries we will end up setting to protect us all? Human beings are historically bad at implementing guardrails with our new toys, so what would happen if they are in the hands of a madman? It's something that has been preoccupying my brain recently a whole lot, and with my own filter reading the aptly named We're Taking Everyone Down With Us, a new 6-issue spy revenge thriller sci-fi mystery. It's a lot of things. Miniseries from Image Comics, and I've got the perfect person to help me digest its complexities. First time show guest, Matthew Rosenberg. Matthew, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here finally.
Yeah. Well, I see you're on the press trail for the project. I was chatting with Jerry Duggan a couple days ago, and he was talking about the Comics Pro retailer event and
Sure.
how it was like hosting a mini con of sorts. So it's a pretty savvy marketing idea you got going on there.
Yeah, yeah. Comics Pro is a cool organization, and I think I go a lot, and they have an annual meeting of retailers, and the thing that I always sort of feel like is missing is it's such a good opportunity for retailers and comic creators to sort of talk without all the in-betweens and filters. And so, yeah, this year we went kind of hard to try and break down those walls a little more and get the people who make the books and the people who sell the books, in the same room and hanging out. And I think it was fun. I think it was a good time.
Yeah. Was it an officially sanctioned event, or did you guys kind of crash the party?
No, no, it was we were worried we were going to crash the party, and I reached out to them and said, we wanna throw a party. It was me and Jerry Duggan, Chip Zdarsky, and James Tynan, wanted to throw a, like, sort of real a party, a thank you party, and for retailers and a chance to, like, buy everyone dinner and hang out. And so, yeah, they sectioned us. We were very glad they did, because I got very terrified at a certain point that we were going to put a lot of money into buying mozzarella sticks and then have them be like, "But we have another event that night." And they luckily held the date for us, and so it turned out well. And free mozzarella sticks. Who's gonna say no to that?
Nobody complains about that. And your newsletter tells me that you ended up playing some Gigi Allen over the loudspeakers. So that blew my mind. How exactly did that happen?
We went there, and we basically took over this bar in Atwater Village in LA. And uh a couple days before, I was like, "What is the music situation?" And they were like, "You play whatever you want." And I was like, "Okay." And I knew that everyone else was a little preoccupied, and I said, I'll take care of it." And so I just made a playlist, and stuff I like and stuff I listen to, and then yeah, I put on a GG Allen on the playlist, and as a joke, and sort of forgot that I did that. And so, yeah, we were in the party at one point, and I was just talking to, I don't remember who I was talking to. There was a lot of people there, and suddenly I was just like, "Oh yeah, we're playing GG Allen at a bar in LA," and there's all these, like, comic creative luminaries from Los Angeles, and all these retailers, and it's a good time. GG Allen's a great party soundtrack. I endorse it.
So, did you ever get a chance to actually see him?
It did, yeah. I saw GG Allen when I was very little. I think I went to one of his last shows when I was, like, literally maybe 13 or 14. And
Oh, wow. Okay, now I'm old. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I'm old. I saw him. That's how I saw him. And yeah, I think I went out to the deepest recesses of Williamsburg, which was a very different Williamsburg at the time, and uh went to a warehouse and saw about 3 songs and fled in terror, and was just like, "I can't. This is not for me. This is too scary." And I left. And then he
Yeah.
he died right after that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody had to expect that one way or another. He
Sure.
was he was destined.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, after seeing 3 songs live, I was pretty. Yeah, it was not a shocker that he died within a year. I was like, "Yeah, that's." Yeah, that guy was
Got
gonna
yours?
die. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him once, very memorable. I was on the road myself, had a couple of days off, and met up with another road buddy, and he was on the Metallica tour at the time, so we drug Lars out with us to see him, and my friend's caller ID, up until his passing, actually said Gigi Allen. This is how big a fan he was.
Oh, wow.
So Gigi walked out on stage wearing combat boots and leather chaps with nothing else,
Sure.
and there was a bucket center stage where the mic stand was, right? Hadn't spoken yet, squats down, inserts the microphone where the sun don't shine,
Mhm.
starts screaming into the mic. It's it doesn't work properly,
Sure.
at that point, and he gets annoyed, so he starts swinging it in this big arc,
Mhm.
and eventually it's hitting people in the crowd while he's screaming out his songs. It's not the wildest show I've ever seen, with that was Wesley Willis, when Wesley did not take his meds,
Sure.
um, but it was enough like you for me to be like, "Yeah, I'm good. I've seen it. I'm
Yeah,
done."
yeah. I all I remember, it was sort of all a blur for me, but I do remember that maybe 20 seconds into the first song, he just grabbed a random dude in the crowd and started hitting him in the face. And I was just like, "Oh, he's really hitting that guy." Like, there's a lot of blood coming, and people are, like, trying to get him off him, and then, like, the second song started, and he just grabbed a different guy and started hitting him in the face, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go before I get punched in the face with that." I also one of the craziest shows I ever saw was also Wesley Willis, but there was a whole it was a whole big thing, and, it was like a bunch of hardcore bands, and it was like Wesley Willis and Sublime and some rap groups. It was a crazy show, but there was a riot at the show, and the club was like everybody out. And there was this huge brawl, and they cleared everyone out of the show. And as they were clearing everyone out, cops came tearing up onto the sidewalk and hit a bunch of people who had nothing to do with the riot with their
Oh
car,
god.
and it was pretty like like not just like bumped, but like smashed front windshield, like hit hard enough to like yeah send people to hospital, and it was just totally like cops just driving up onto the sidewalk way too fast, and yeah, and Wesley Willis I remember was just drawing like the entire time, like people were fighting and breaking shit and all this stuff, and he was just sitting on the floor drawing. It was pretty great.
Yeah, dude has a chaos orbit, I gotta
Yeah,
say. I mean,
yeah,
there's just always some shit going on around him for sure. Or
yeah,
was. Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, I wanna pick your brain for a second about marketing and comics, and I'll start with a music illustration since we're kind of on that. I was talking to a friend the past week. He used to be a stage manager for a bunch of household names, and my assertion was Tate McRae already has a bigger career than Madonna. He kinda took umbrage to that, but to me, it was all about scale and the number of ears and eyeballs that Tate has in 2025 from all these different types of media, right? It's
mhm,
just we live in unprecedented times. This YouTube video has 197,000,000 views on it
uh-huh.
already. So conversely, the heyday of comic sales was in the 1990s, and no disrespect to that era, but we're in a renaissance, I feel like, in the comics medium with quality and the breadth of what's on shelves today. And now we also have all these things at our disposal. So everything in my mind is kind of in place for success. Why aren't comics bigger than they are?
Um, it's a really good question. I think comics aren't, I mean, going back to your previous analogy, I think Tate McRae, I don't necessarily agree with your assertion that Tate McRae is bigger than Madonna, but certainly she sells less records. The comics is, there's a lot of things. The 90s was a perfect storm of a lot of things. It was a perfect storm of accessibility and collectability uh, and culture coming together. And those are hard things to replicate. The culture has fractured a lot so that there's a lot of different tastes and a lot of different interests. I think, this is before video games were so prevalent. This is before the internet was so prevalent. This is before home streaming was so prevalent. It really is, when you talk about every kid in the 90s read Jim Lee, Chris Claremont X-Men. It's like, cool, their TV had 12 channels, and maybe one of every four of them had a Nintendo, and they owned 3 games for it. And the games, did not have 800 hours of playability. It was Super Mario Brothers. You kind of beat it or you don't.
Right.
Um, so I think there's that. Excuse me. I think also we've done a few things to the comics market that are both good and bad. The focus on longer form storytelling and trade paperbacks has made uh sort of dragged comics kicking and screaming into more of an adult hemisphere, which is nice in some ways, but not nice in others. And it means that the single issue feels less important, the single issue feels less relevant. But also, there's more and more messaging that these aren't for kids. There's more and more. It's not a $1.50 investment anymore to go get a story and get entertainment. It's a $4, $5 investment, and that's only one fourth or fifth or sixth of the story. So, it's a pretty hefty investment. And like, I go back and forth, I think sometimes about how comics, I'm like, yeah, it's $4 for like all these people put hundreds of hours of work into this. It's pretty amazing that you can get that for $4. And then someone always points out to me that, a Netflix subscription is like $12. And that's,
Right.
10,000 movies and 100 million hours of TV. I have no idea what the numbers of what Netflix has are, but it's for cash value. We are now in a era of just a glut of content that is available so easily and so readily distractible. I mean, YouTube is free, like Spotify is free. Like it's really hard to fight for that. I also think um the collectability was a double-edged sword in that, everyone was buying Death of Superman and New Mutants 98 and all those things and buying all these books and hoarding them. And what I think we lost is the idea that comics are supposed to be somewhat disposable. Comics are supposed to be something that you trade with your friends, that you lend, you buy and you read and you give to someone. And like I'm a collector, so I'm guilty of it as much as anyone. But uh, the idea that these things are supposed to appreciate in value means they don't trade hands as much. Means that people are not as willing to give them out. They're not as willing to be rough with them. There's not as willing to part with them, and that means they're just getting in less hands. All of that coupled with the fact that after the collapse, comics are no longer returnable, which kills you on newsstands, it kills you on supermarkets, and that shipping prices got astronomical. So you live in a small town, you can't get a subscription from Marvel, you can't get a subscription straight from DC. You can get them from comic shops, but they're expensive. Like it's not nothing to get that subscription. It's not just cover price. And it's just a perfect storm in the same way that the 90s is a perfect storm of readability. I think of access to comics. The 2020s is a perfect storm of inaccess to comics. Everything makes it sort of against comics. And I think that's how a lot of culture is now. I mean, we talk about the fracturization of culture, and like it's something like 1 in every 8 households in America watch the finale of MASH. Like 1 in every 8. And now like a super hit TV show is 1 in every 400 households watches something, is like an event of great note, of like networks are scrambling to replicate that. And that's just how it is. I mean, the markets are just, you have your blockbusters, you have your Avengers that go make $1 billion, but indie movies are struggling, novels are struggling, prose is struggling, record sales are in the toilet, even video games are having a rough go right now. And like there are breakout hits, but every medium is sort of fractured as there's just so much content.
Yeah, and it feels like from what you're saying, maybe comics is even a little bit too sacred. Maybe the collector's market specifically. We've just deified the system in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's, and I'm guilty of it, and I bag and board my comics, and I do all that, and I'm guilty of it, but I'm also aware that, like, when I was a kid, it was super easy to go get access to comics, and it's just
Right.
not. It's just it's an item that you can't, like, Free Comic Day is great. It's a great event. Um, we should figure out a way to do 10 more of them. We should figure out a way to, do them in schools. We should figure out a way to do them, like a Scholastic Book Fair used to do. I guess they still do Scholastic Book Fairs. We should be figuring out ways to be like, programs for kids to be like, come into the shop and you'll get a starter pack of comics that's free, or, $1 or whatever. What those kids are going to do with that when the books are then $4 or $5 after is hard to exactly chart. But I think there's a real accessibility problem, and that comes from all of us being so protective of them. I don't, I've never had, I don't think neighbors give out comics anymore, and whatever. And that used to be a thing for me. Like my neighbor would be like, I read this, kid, here you go. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to break myself of that. All the single issues I get every year, I give out on Halloween, and I don't, I now when I get a new book, when I make a book, I'm very much like get some extra copies to like just have to on me to be able to give out. And if someone's like, yeah, a lot of my stuff's not exactly kid appropriate, but if there's an appropriate venue where people are like, oh, donate to this thing that would needs comics, I have copies available for that reason. I just think they need to be more accessible to people.
Yeah. I've gotten in the habit actually of stuff that I really dig, leaving it in doctor's offices that I happen to just be in, and I'll take the extra copies and just leave them in the magazines, and
Yeah.
whoever they find is, hopefully they get into it. So
It's amazing. When I first started my career, I started at Black Mask, and they were a very scrappy small company, which they still are, but I chose to forego getting paid a page rate, and I said, can you just pay me in comps and I'll make my money myself? Like I'll do it at shows and get them out. And my contract never changed. So by the time, like, one weekend I ever go home, I actually made my living off that book for a year. But by the time Four Kids Walking on a Bank came out and did very well, relatively, I was drowning in comps because I got a percentage of the print run as comps, and I spent quite a few years, I would just go on the subway, and every subway ride I would leave one on a chair. I'd leave an issue of Four Kids Walking to a Bank on a seat. I'd go into a coffee shop, I'd leave one behind, and it was like a calling card. I'm sure that there are people who probably have 100 copies of issue 1 of that book from just following me around the city and being on the same commuter trains as me. But it's
yeah.
you have to get the books out somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've been doing a lot of ground pounding to try to do that with this title, and sometimes I'm conflicted because there's such a hustle culture, in comics, but it's also necessity.
Sure, yeah. I love the hustle culture.
Me
I
too. I mean,
I
I love it.
Sure, yeah. I feel bad for people who don't. I think it is a huge barrier to entry in comics, and it
Yeah.
really is. There's not a good way for people who are kind of wanna just stay home and do work, and people who wanna be quiet and don't wanna network and don't wanna, do all that stuff. There's a huge, huge barrier for having a career, especially as a writer. Like, artists, I feel like there's a little bit more of an acceptance of letting the work speak for itself, but writers, like, have to get out there, have to do this stuff. And from years of working in the music business, like, sort of thrive in that environment in a kind of DIY space. So I like it, but I like it for me, but it does make me sad for all the great talents who can't either can't do it physically, or it's an economic burden to do it. It's time, and time is money, and often it's not just time but also money, and money is definitely money. So it
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
it,
and I mean,
it makes it hard.
yeah, and safety is a component too. There's a lot of people who are the queer community or women or femme presenting folks, that that vulnerability feels very risky.
Oh,
So
yeah. And the internet, obviously, I don't, I have a lot of friends who, um, are sort of more at risk from harassment and things of that nature. And the online community, or whatever, I wouldn't call it a community, the online space, definitely makes it clear that people need to be on their toes. I find that for the most part, cons are slightly a better experience than you're going to get on Twitter. But you still are going to get weirdos and people making things difficult. And yeah, that's not a space people necessarily want to put themselves in. And I totally understand that. And it's a problem we have to deal with and confront. Otherwise, we're going to have a very homogenous creative field, which is, which we've had for a very long time and is very detrimental to the types of stories we get and the types of audiences we get and just art in general. It's not healthy for art to only come from a certain place.
Yeah. Yeah. That's historically speaking, pretty much exactly what happened. So yeah. Well, cool. Let's jump into the book itself. That's what you're here to do. You're talking about the book. So, as I understand it, the genesis was from your old Punisher partner, Stefano Landini, reaching out and saying he wanted to draw a robot. Does that about sum it up?
Yeah. Me and Stefano worked on Punisher. We did some other stuff. We did a little bit of Star Wars together, very little, but and then we were supposed to do another book together at Marvel right at the start of the pandemic, and it fell apart on us. And Stefano reached out and said, we should do our own book, which is always if you're a writer, it's the most flattering thing you get is an artist reaching out. It's very much usually a one-way street the other way. And then I said, yeah. And he said, I have an idea. And I said, even better. You're doing my whole job for me. This is great.
No doubt.
And then he sent a drawing of a robot. And I was like, that's not an idea. That's a drawing of a robot. And he was like, no, I want to do like a sexy spy robot thing. And I didn't know what that really was. And I was very confused by it. And he said, I think it's a fun design, a fun character. We should do it. And I took 2-3 weeks to sort of come up with a story and a world for this robot that he'd sent me. I printed it out and pinned it on above my desk and, tried to figure out what it was. And I added all this other stuff that's very me, I think, to it. And it wasn't until working on issue 3 that I realized that Stefano, that I was sort of pulling him in one direction and he was pulling me in another. And both of us were probably right that I'm doing telling a certain type of story. But if I just followed Stefano's lead and we'd done this fun robot adventure book where he was just a sexy spy, but he's also a robot, I think it would be a really fun book. But I also think I had a moment of realizing that and sort of feeling worried that I stepped on his idea a little bit and was giving him something that he didn't bargain for. And we talked about it and he was like, no, I love the book and I'm very proud of the way it's going. And I am too. And I think what both of us realized is that the fact that we were pulling in different directions sort of made a better book because the influence, it's the influences are not just adding more spice to the mix, but also everything is sort of tested against the other. So I have to make sure that my drama about, family and revenge and regret and the threshold of adulthood is still a fun spy adventure book. And he has to make sure that his robot who punches people's heads off book is still has emotional weight and has this character work that I'm trying to get into it. And so I think it's one of those things where people not necessarily starting on the same page ends up in a much more exciting place for everyone involved.
Have you ever worked on something kind of with this methodology before where you have a visual cue of a nucleus and then you just wrap everything else sort of around it?
No, it's new to me, and I really liked it. It felt for a long time. I wasn't ever sure that it was good for the first year that we worked on it because it felt like a writing experiment. It didn't feel like a
Okay.
book. It
Sure.
felt like a challenge. And I was like, okay, am I making the challenge work? Is this successful? And it wasn't until I was in issue 2 that I was like, well, I'd finished issue 2 that I was like, okay, wait, these are good characters. This is a story that I like. This is something that I feel like I want to talk about. This is engaging to me. And with that, I went back and we massively retooled issue 1 because there were still moments that I was like, I feel like I'm trying to hit a checklist rather than tell something that feels organically natural to what I would the story I'd tell. And so it's been a lot of trial and error. There's actually, there's probably there's definitely a PDF floating around of issue 1 on the internet that is wildly different than the final issue 1. That is like characters have different names, the scenes are in different orders, different scenes exist. Like and yeah, I mean it's been something we've wildly retooled. I mean, cards on the table. We sent out a preview to retailers. We sent out a preview to press. That's the book, but it's actually not the book. um, there's actually 3 pages that are not in any edition. So like the copies that people are getting that the retailers had and the um, things like that are missing a scene. And there's actually a major page that's been completely redrawn to totally shift the mood. Um, and that's just like, that's me and Stefano's madness of just like constantly we've been slow baking it for so long that we really have like tinkered with it as much as we could until it just had to go out the door. And so that's, there's definitely, it's definitely not a way that I would necessarily choose to work normally, but I'm very proud of where it got. But it was a lot of work to get there to be something that we're both really, really, and I'm more proud of it than almost anything I've ever done, but it is also been a true labor of love.
I mean, the way you're talking about it, it feels like gumbo, right? We obsess over influences in comics, but you really have all this assortment of ideas and stuff and these ingredients kind of like a recipe, and you sort of thrown it into the pot together and letting it simmer, and then whatever comes out is kind of something uniquely its own.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's something I always, that for me, that part at least for me is always somewhat in the mix. I think that, I'm a big um sort of sponge for not just art I consume, but also life experiences. And so there's a lot of, it is funny because I think like, people often like catch a reference to something or catch an homage to something or recognize an influence and they think they've really unlocked something. And I'm like, yeah, it's all like influences and things that
It's subjective. Yeah.
yeah, I wear my heart on my sleeve and so I'm like, yeah, there's gonna be some Star Wars in there, but there's also gonna be some, Wong Kar-wai in there. There's gonna be some uh, you know, Caravaggio in there. There's gonna be whatever. There's gonna be some Clash in there. It's all these things. And then if you know me and you're friends with me, I think people are often like, is that us or is that me in the book? And I'm like, that moment is like there's a lot of that I think is very much uh the gumbo way of making things that I sort of am just I spend a lot of time in my head. I spend a lot of time just sitting staring and thinking or sitting in front of a computer or a notebook and what comes out is just everything that's been thrown in my head and brought to a boil sort of spills out.
Yeah, I mean, my own, pull from it, my association was Scud the Disposable Assassin. I don't know if you remember Scud the Disposable Assassin from
Uh,
Rob Schrab back in the
the
90s?
omnibus is on my bookshelf right there.
Yes, I love Scud. Scud, so if
It's
people
great.
who don't know, Scud was basically a vending machine robot assassin that you pay to take out a specific target, and then it self-destructs. There you go, that's Scud. So
Yeah, yeah. Super fun, wild book of great humor and heart and energy and weirdness.
oh, yeah, yeah. I
Wow.
mean, Scud, I guess this is what was making me think about this stuff was Scud is kinetic and fluid, more like a ninja,
For sure.
and the robots in this book are very rigid. It's kind of a spooky design.
Right.
The countenance of the jaw is insectoid. At least that was what I got out of it, which
Mhm.
makes it sinister and totally the opposite of what we think of like a modern assistance robot, like the Neo Beta, which they unveiled and the internet went mad over recently.
Mhm.
They had, where the facial features are very round and,
Yeah.
softer so that it's not intimidating anyway. This was very much CP3 hell no is
Yeah.
was my take on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, the robot in our book is, a mad scientist's version of the perfect helper, and that it'll help you with chores, it can answer questions, it can look after your kid, but it also, can tear people apart and kill people if needed. It is a a utilitarian design for a very twisted mind. And it's not friendly or cuddly or supposed to be endearing. Um, and in that, that sort of, as the book goes on, will become a theme of just like the robots are very much a um terrifying concept. They're a terrifying first foot for our main character, our protagonist Annalise. It's her father who builds them. He's a sort of mad scientist, and um the more people think he's sort of been off the grid and been not a threat for a long time. He used to be a sort of global threat, and he vanished more than a decade ago. But when people see that he's been building these robots, it sort of becomes this like much more terrifying thing that he's been doing that they weren't aware of. So yeah, the robots needed to not be, they're not nanny robots, as is the simple way of putting it.
Yeah, as somebody with a disability in 2020, I went through a phase with my own personal illness stuff where I couldn't walk unassisted. So like I'm reading this and kind of absorbing. It's like I do not want one of these fuckos around me to help me out with anything. Like
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
they're creepy.
yeah, they're creepy, and it is, yeah, they're supposed to be creepy. Stefano, it's funny because actually we talk a lot about, I've talked a lot about how Stefano had this idea for a robot, and actually what ended up happening is that the design of our robot isn't the robot he sent me. Um,
Okay.
the robot he sent me was much sort of cooler and sexier and kind of slick, and it wasn't necessarily comforting, but it was not terrifying.
Okay.
And as I built the story up, he's like, I have a new idea for design, and it became a lot scarier. It became a lot more evil C3PO than it was.
Well, despite all the tech trappings of this ultimately a family revenge story about Annalise and her dad. You referenced the mad scientist, and revenge fiction never gets old, especially when it's tied to family. My son and I have gone back and we're watching the John Wick movies together now. Tell me there are no dogs showing up though, right? Like that's not going to happen.
No dogs, no dogs.
Okay, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's good. That's good. Glad to hear that.
The yeah,
Well, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, yeah, I think that revenge and is, it's one of the great motivators in all of fiction, and so it's always a fun thing to tap into for me.
Yeah. Well, the interplay between them I thought was really, really well handled, man. The
Thanks.
It's very relatable. I have a teenager myself right now, and Dr. Alderman's sort of shifting back and forth with distraction, which we all experience, and kind of from that and into dad mode, and how you're going to get pulled between those two. Now,
Sure.
granted, I'm not trying to do diabolical things and ruin the world, but yeah, it was very, very relatable story.
Yeah, thank you. I think some of that goes back to um personal experiences I've had, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that some of this is about um my own family in some way, and my dad was a very was an amazing father and a very loving, attentive father, but also was a person who worked 80 hours a week, a lot of weeks. And,
Right.
um, I have a lot of memories of him being like, you can come in to my office and hang out. You just can't talk to me. And a thing that we did to bond was that I would, take records from his record collection and play records. And I could sit there and listen to his records near him. And that was a very formative thing for me while he was working. And but I see it now in my family and my close family and in friends, and I see it growing up. I'm of a generation of latchkey kids. I'm of a generation where we were coming home from school, and there maybe wouldn't be a parent home, and no one would know where you were until it was dinner time, and it was just your job to sort of take care of yourself. And I think that's you know uh I'm very I'm very romantic of that idea. I romanticize that idea rather in my head a lot for me growing up in New York and you know learning my life on the streets and with friends and just exploring and getting into trouble and having fun and all that stuff, but also I think about now as an adult, the converse of that, of like what it means to have not been there to raise me, and to me be getting in trouble, and like I was brought back to the house and by the cops a couple times, not for anything serious, but like normal kid stuff of spray painting
Sure.
and skateboarding and whatnot, um and just how incredibly stressful that must have been for my parents, and being torn between being a parent who provides and a parent who's there is so hard and so difficult. And so I wanted to explore some of that from both sides, from sort of the parental side and the kid side.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately logged on to Annalise as a character, as a fellow Gen Xer. I think a lot of us are gonna just zero in on that element, the
Sure.
latchkey kid who are sort of, I'm gonna say discarded, and that sounds awful, but in a lot of ways it was that way.
Mhm.
And how well do we really know our parents? My mom, for the entirety of my childhood, was a smoker, and I had no idea. And I found out a couple of years ago. I was like, how the hell did you keep that from us? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely a theme that I kept coming back to.
Yeah, I think and I think it's I'm very was very close to my parents, and my mom. I'm still very close to my mom. She's still around, and um it's I have a funny moment of that, which is less so, but me and my friends when we were 14 were big like horror movie nerds, and we would go, and there was a video store where we'd rent movies from, and the guy who worked there had all this stuff that he definitely should not have been renting to 13 or 14-year-olds, and was like,
Same. Yep.
you
Totally.
gotta see this. You gotta watch this.
Faces of Death.
Exactly. Like, yeah, it was all that
Yep.
stuff. And I just had this moment, and I think about it all the time, of coming home and being like, "Oh, mom, this was crazy. We watched this really messed up movie at Dan's house, and the writer had your name." And my parents had to be like, "Okay, sit down." And be like, my mom had to be like, "I wrote that. I wrote that before you were born." And that is, yeah, I wrote that horribly misogynistic slasher movie. And that for me was like,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, yeah, it was a real moment of like, oh, I don't, there's just like these lives of your parents that you don't know, and don't, and you shouldn't know. I mean, it's fine to know that your mom wrote a movie or whatever, but you shouldn't. My mom wasn't proud of it, didn't want us to know, and would have been happy if we never found out. I think, but the uh, yeah, I think there's this idea of just like the distant. There's something really tragic about the distance between parents and children. Especially after you've lost a parent, there's something about all the things that you're going to never have access to. All the
Right.
things, all the things you took for granted, that um, you're always going to have to hear these boring stories, and then the first time you're like, I can't hear that boring story anymore. I don't remember how it went. It changes your whole perspective on everything, and so you know, that's something that sort of is baked into this book, in a lot of ways, of just the regret of troubled relationships, and losing people, and all of those ideas. I promise the book has jokes in it too. It's not just about revenge and regret and sadness, and failing familial relationships. There's jokes. There's
That's my fault.
it's
I
funny.
tend to lock on to more serious things, and I mean, but the book resonated with me in that way. I'm having gone through what I did in 2020, and hearing you talk about it. I've been pretty open about it on the podcast, but I nearly died.
Mhm.
And it gave me a fresh start. Not that my relationship with my son was bad. It was not by any stretch of the imagination,
Sure.
but it just changes your perspective, and you learn to appreciate all the little things that
Oh,
you
oh,
may not have noticed before.
100%. And,
Um,
for me, a lot of this book is also built on the fact that, like, I'm very close to my brother, and I don't have any kids or anything, but he, now has a son, my nephew, who's amazing, and I love so much. But watching my brother change, watching him become a different person because he has a kid, and watching different aspects of his personality evolve, and watching his interest change, to me was fascinating. And like,
oh
obviously
yeah.
I have friends who've had kids, and I'm very close to a lot of people who had kids, and had other family members who had kids, but my brother was such an interesting thing, because it was like he was this person that I sort of defined myself in the context of in a lot of ways. Like I grew up with him
Sure.
and who he was, and then I was like, oh, for the first time in my life, like there are things that I'm not sure that I know about you. Like you're different in these fundamental ways that are really kind of beautiful and wonderful um and I never really talked to him about thinking about the person he was before, and I don't think he sees the delineation between the two people, but, like, I do clearly, like, he's a different person in a lot of ways.
Oh, for
And it
sure. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I read into the book, and that's the counterpoint to Annalise is what does the parent, what does the good Dr. Alderman actually become in her absence? I mean,
yeah,
obviously, he's a mad scientist, and I know my own dark tendencies are heavily moderated by my family, whose
sure.
presence the world is probably much better without, because now everybody else gets the best version of me.
Y
So,
yeah, yeah, I think, it's funny, I haven't really talked about this very much, but I'm actually working on a different book that hopefully we're gonna announce before too long, that I've been working on as long as I've been working on this book. So we actually have 160 pages drawn of this other book, but it's not announced. So it's, we're into the second volume of this book, and it's sort of the companion piece to this book. It's completely unrelated. It's not in this shared universe at all. Like
okay.
there's not going to be crossover. But in working on this book and picking a sort of perspective of this relationship and really focusing on Annalise, and her relationship with her father, I became very fascinated about these ideas that didn't make it into this book, that would be her father's sort of perspective more and his ideas.
Okay.
And his perspective and his ideas are definitely in the book, but there was things that had to be cut to sort of focus on her a little more, and that sort of took on a life of its own and became another book that I think when people see it, they're gonna be like, "It's weird that you have this other thing," but that's just how my brain works, that I sort of I take an idea and I my brain goes crazy with it and runs so wild that it ends up becoming another thing. These ones are maybe people are gonna think they're closely connected, maybe people are gonna be like, "There's no connection at all other than a couple pieces of set dressing," but it is funny to me that, like, uh, there's sort of 2 sides of this relationship, and it sort of fractured into 2 different books that are completely different for each other, which is weird, I know, but
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, the best art, even your own art, is going to inspire you in different ways as you absorb it over time. I mean, I think that's the best compliment an artist or could ever get, either reinterpreting their own work or hearing somebody else's interpretation of it. And
yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of it also is I write a lot of comics, but writing a big 2, like a corporate superhero book is sort of a very different thing for me, but writing a creator-owned book, which I don't do that often, I really spend a lot of time laying groundwork and sort of building things in my head, and there just ends up with so much on the cutting room floor that at a certain point I'm like, that's a whole other movie. Like that's a whole I've cut out more footage than I keep. And so I end up, I live in these spaces mentally and emotionally that it sort of makes sense that when I'm like, yeah, I just have a lot more to say on this than I can fit in 5, 6 issues. And so that's sort of where some of the things that I'm doing in the next few years are going to be coming from, is like revisiting ideas and going back to things that I thought were interesting but didn't fit.
yeah, this is the Prince methodology basically that you're describing here.
Sure,
Um,
yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm the prince of comics. I always like to say that, yeah.
Hey, we'll go with that. I like
Yeah.
that. That's a great moniker. You should be
It's
Prince.
it's I definitely don't think that I'm the prince of comics. Um, but yeah, someone is, and I'm happy for them.
Well, I kept circling back because my son is 17 now, um, and those terms of endearment sort of have to shift and change, especially in social settings. I can't call him sweetie anymore without
Sure,
him getting a little upset. So I got a bit obsessive about the starfish term of
sure.
endearment that
Mhm.
Alderman uses. They're able to regrow their limbs, and I mentally applied that to the overlay
Also
to us as humanity, creating these machine learning models that are gonna replace aspects of ourselves. Is that Am I reading too much in? Is that to be yet to be revealed later kind of thing?
You're not reading too much in. It's funny because I don't know how many people have read the book now. A bunch. I've sent it to a lot of friends, and actually Jerry Duggan, who we spoke about, called me and asked me about it. And was like, "Starfish, what's the deal?" And I talked to him, and he's like, "Okay." Um, he was a little uh he was like, "It's a weird nickname," and I was like, "It's a weird nickname, but it is, starfish are cute." And I don't think most people are going to stop on the street and be like, if someone is like, "Hey, little starfish," to their kid, I don't think most people are going to whatever. But there is more to it than you'll see on the surface, and I won't say more than that, but it does mean something in the greater context of the book. And I I I'm always happy when people sort of pick up on that. So
Cool. Well, I also swear you made up some of the drugs that Alderman ends up using, because I mean, I was on the road working with rock and rap bands for over a decade, and I have no fucking clue what Edgar Winter's earwax is. And when this drops on shelves, the Google searches for that term are going to skyrocket.
yeah, the first time I wrote it, it was all real drugs, and it wasn't. It was funny. There's a scene where he's listing drugs, and the character's listing drugs, and it was funny. But I was like, they shouldn't all be real. And then it was a long, long process of creating fake 1960s, 70s drugs, which I I will say that I think we really bottomed out with crack. I mean, culturally, we definitely bottomed out with crack, but also it feels like that was the last of trying to have interesting or good drug names. I feel like drug names used to be really fun, which is part of the allure, probably. I'm straight edge, so it doesn't have much allure for me at all. But
Sure.
the you hear about 70s drugs and you're like, that sounds awesome. And now it's just like, I don't know. Modern drugs don't sound fun. If they're
They
not,
sound branded.
yeah, they
Is
sound
it?
branded. It sounds like corporate. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
like MDMA is just like, well, that's not fun. But like even Molly, you're just like, that's a boring nickname. Like in the 70s, that
X.
wouldn't have lasted long. Like we would have gotten rid of Molly as a name fast. Um, and then you had the drugs that didn't, totally necessarily get nicknames that kept their monikers, like Quaaludes. And Quaaludes was just such an alluring, funny drug to me. Um, I love that Quaaludes were like such this incredibly prevalent drug that they just stopped making, and people were like, "Yeah, we just don't do that anymore." They just stopped making it, and no one bothered to recreate it, and it's just not a drug that exists anymore. I think a drug going extinct is very funny for some reason. So I think Quaaludes is in there still. I think maybe I took Quaaludes out. I think I left it in. I try and put Quaaludes into a lot of my books because I think they're funny.
I mean, peyote is always a clincher because P words are just inherently
Yeah,
naughty.
yeah.
So,
Peyote's funny. Peyote sounds funny when you say it, and then it's so benign kind of that it makes it's always scary, like when there's a drug that has like a cute name and then you're like, oh, but it's terrifying. Like it makes you lose your mind and stab people. You're like, oh, that's not good. Like that's not what we want. But peyote feels like, yeah, that's the drug you get. That feels all right.
well, I didn't intentionally mean to tank sales for anybody who's listening and like, oh, not getting this for my kid now.
Yeah, don't get it for your kid. I mean, I don't know. If your kid's cool, you can have it.
Read it with your kid. That's
Read,
my philosophy
read,
on
read
things.
it before you give it to your kid. They'll
Yeah.
probably be okay. You can just, bring a Sharpie and just black out a couple things. That's fine. Don't be precious about your comic. You can cover a couple lines of dialogue and maybe a couple panels.
I mean, our generation learned bad words on the end of Cal Ripken's baseball bat. So,
Sure, yeah, yeah. That's a all-time great card. So uh yeah, I do feel like they're like I mean, I'm not telling anyone how to raise their kids, but you know, it's fine. Your kid can read it. It's fine.
yeah. Well, primarily because of this book, I went down a rabbit hole yesterday looking at nature versus nurture and machine learning models and exploring how this, I didn't even know what this was, but KA, and it sounds like a drug name itself, but knowledge acquisition frameworks will work its way, into all these different things. It was really, really fascinating rabbit hole.
Sure.
But all of that is to say the best comics, in my mind, are those that make you think. And in that regard, I would definitely call this a resounding success if people haven't picked up on that so far.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that the book is funny because it did stem from a lot of research about AI and robots and robotics, and I did my due diligence, and then a lot of that sort of got thrown out the door because I was like, well, okay, I know what a lot of this is, but also I need it to work in a 1960s, 70s context of mad scientists and um, you know, v- vampire gorillas and like, you know, secret armies and things like that are also in the book. And so there's a whole there is the roots in actual knowledge, but then I throw a lot of it out. And so yeah, if people are really going to it's not going to be a textbook on AI at the end of the day. But I think there are some interesting ideas in there about robotics and the way we interact with them, and I hope that stuff carries over because I did put a lot of work into it.
I mean, I think that's the beauty of comics, though, is you're meshing this initial concept, Stefano, I really want to draw a robot. And
Yep.
then you get into it together, you figure it out, you hash it out, you revise it. It comes out to be a hybrid of a really quality book in so many ways that people can absorb whoever they are and wherever they're at, you know. And I think that's a testament to it.
Yeah, thank you. The thing I joked before when I was like, it's about whatever I was saying about trauma and generational trauma and violence and revenge and all these things. But and I said, there's also jokes in it. But I think that is, something we did set out to do, which is have a book that works on a lot of levels. If you want a fun action adventure or buddy comedy, like the book is that. Like it is a girl and a robot running around getting into trouble, and that's fun. And like there are jokes and there is funny stuff happens. If you want to like, violent revenge thriller, like that's in there too. And if you want a family drama about, the distance between generations and the regret we have at who our kids become and losing our parents and all of these things, like that's also in there. And I feel like my hope is that people who just want one of those things will read the book and be like, I enjoyed it and I enjoyed the other parts too that I didn't go for. And I compared it once to talking to someone as like, it's like a big buffet of ideas, and like you're gonna go and everybody goes and they want the steak or they want the chicken or they want whatever the big thing is, but maybe the thing they end up liking most is the mashed potatoes or the thing you just grab because you're like, well, I can't just fill my plate with steak. I have to look like a normal person and I have to get some Brussels sprouts, and then you're like, actually the Brussels sprouts were the best part. Like that's sort of the idea, one of the ideas in this book is that we're trying to have it be multiple things and sort of have those things complement each other. But if you just want one of those things, I think there's enough of it in there that hopefully you walk away liking it. I hope.
I did. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, thank you.
Of course. When are we hitting stores? When's it dropping on shelves?
March 26th is the
Okay.
first issue. So right around the
Cool.
corner.
Well, what else you got cooking that you can talk about? I know there's a little DC versus vampire. That's still going, right?
That is still going. Yes.
I always buy trades. I'm a trade. You can see behind me. I'm a trades
Sure,
guy. I don't
sure.
do so much.
No,
chasing.
I 100% get it. Yeah, we're DC vs. Vampires. Me and Otto Schmidt and the team. We took a little break last month to do a little side story about Wonder Woman and Alfred and their different paths in the world of heroes and villains. And now we're back. New issue just dropped, issue 7, and I think it just dropped. Yes, it did. I remember people telling me they liked it. And someone asking me who all the robots were. There's a lot of robots in that issue. Robots on the brain.
It's on the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's really fun, and I really like this will be I'm coming up on writing my 30th issue, somewhere in there. Is that right? 29th, 30th issue of DC vs. Vampires, which I feel like it's the most fun it's been for me, like, which is exciting to just be going that long on a book. And We're getting ready to wrap it, but we still have a bunch to go. We have 5 issues to go, and I think it's the most fun we've had making it. So that's always a fun feeling, and I don't think it's too spoiler to say that the dark side has appeared, and anytime dark side can show up, it's obviously going to be a lot of fun. He's a funny guy. We all love him. And what else am I working on that I can talk about? Oh, well, What's the First Place from Here is coming out still. Issue 22 is running a little late, but it is coming out. Myself and Tyler Boss have been both a little preoccupied with both family stuff, and obviously I have this book going. We're taking everyone down with us. Tyler is also writing another Image book that launches the same day, March 26th, called You'll Do Bad Things, which is a sort of giallo slasher horror book, which is maybe my favorite book of the year. Is really a brilliant, weird, beautiful, very unique book that I'm incredibly jealous of that Tyler made it. And
Okay.
we're going on a sort of month-long signing tour across the country to promote it. So we are very much in the depths of that. But also while we're there, we want to sign What's the First Place from Here, because we make that together, and that's a labor of love for both of us. So it is we're hoping that it's not just people who show up to pick up the new books, but also people who love those books come out, and we can thank them for reading them and shake their hands and give them some free stuff and all that fun stuff. And then we're just going to eat a lot of hamburgers and listen to a lot of hardcore in the car as we drive across state lines.
What's in your playlist? What have you been listening to recently?
Man, I jump all over the place.
I do too. So no judgment here. You can say whatever, and I'm not gonna.
I
Well, I can't say that, but I think you
well,
probably
now
could.
I hope that I stumble across something that gets it's hard, because a lot of the stuff I listen to when I write, I have to listen to stuff that doesn't have lyrics.
Yeah.
So I listen to a lot of instrumental stuff. I usually listen to a lot of like sort of rock, and I mean sometimes I listen to like classical or jazz. I'm a big like Coltrane, Mingus, Miles Davis kind of stuff. It depends on what I'm writing, but like those are sort of I'm not a huge jazz guy, but like I know the greats. I
Oh,
appreciate the
Miles is
greats.
Miles. Like that's
Yeah.
universally amazing.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think even if you don't like jazz, if you put on, Sketches of Spain, people are going to be like, "Oh, I get this. Like
Yep.
I understand this." Um and I listen to, just some classical or whatever, but what have I been listening to? I'm trying to think. Like I've been listening to a lot of like just like hardcore and punk stuff, and I mean there's the stuff I always listen to. I always, end up going back to like Wire and Gang of Four and The Clash and Mission of Burma and bands like that. But lately I've been listening to there's a band called Skinhead, who are like a sort of super group of hardcore dudes, and it's like kind of a concept album about being a skinhead. um
Okay.
Concept band, although some of them are skinheads, but it's like this hyper violent but very hilarious weird narrative, and I it's like one of my favorite records of last year. The new Scowl record is great. The new Gouge Away record is great. High Viz, I love High Viz, and their new record is really, really good, and sort of a go-to for me constantly. I don't know. New Taylor Swift is really good. I'm still listening to the last Charlie XCX record a lot, which is very good. Um, yeah, there's a new Julian Baker project that I really like, and she's a genius and amazing. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah, me too. There's I think it's Electric Callboy, and I wasn't familiar with them
Oh,
before. It is trying to exactly figure out how to describe it. It's like a pop ministry.
huh.
I mean, ministry is the best grounding point, but it's also very pop, and it fluctuates back and forth between. The video is magic. Like I
Huh.
started watching more videos to try to expose myself to just different kinds of music, because it was just getting stale.
Sure.
Um, and I really enjoyed just finding different stuff that I never would have been exposed to before.
Yeah.
And that's definitely one. It's a really cool track. Just for getting the vibes out, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm a never go back guy, but the new Wu-Tang track pulled me back in. I was
Sure,
really impressed.
sure.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have my tenuous Wu-Tang connection, so I always root for them. I've always been a fan, and oh, the new Kendrick record is great.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
that's sort of a no-brainer. It's interesting. I think going on tour with Tyler is going to be fun because um, we have a lot of overlap in our musical taste, but then there's certain things he likes that I can't stand, and certain things I like that he can't stand. And I think we tend to, when we do these road trips together, have a few days of sort of, you know, working at peace where we're like, I'm only going to play the other person's stuff they like or stuff they'll dig. And then at a certain point, it becomes kind of like an endurance test of like how mopey and emo can Tyler make it, how intense and screamy can I
Oh,
make it,
okay.
and it's fun, and it's you know, it's a test of each other, and we fall out of the car at some comic shop, uh thankful for silence for a little bit. It's a fun dynamic.
I can't do emo. I still feel sorry for the generation whose best rock bands that they can put up on the pedestal is Fall Out Boy, and it just makes me cringe.
Sure. I'm old enough that when people say emo, I still think of like, the DC, like the post-hardcore bands, like the
Yeah.
pre-Fugazis, I think Embrace, Rites of Spring, and then the generation of bands that come after that, like, there's a lot of bands that I think of as emo that people are like, that's not really emo, but I always think of like, like Moss Icon and Angel Hair and bands like that, where I'm like, those are emo bands. And people are like, not really. That's like emo bands are like My Chemical Romance. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's a different thing for me. That's pop punk, but
Yeah,
which
it
is
is.
fine, And there's pop punk that I love. I do love some of those bands, but it's very different. You know, it's a co-opted term or whatever for me.
Yeah, it's hard to genre is something I don't overly obsess with, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that first Fall Out Boy record a lot.
I
I went on a mini tour with them, not with them, but they were on the tour, and I watched them every night and was like, "They're pretty good, nice guys." But
I'm a Social Distortion guy, so I don't know,
sure,
there's something really corrupted about Fall Out Boy that I can't do it, I can't do it. I hate
but,
to rain on people's parade, I
no,
hate it when people do that, but it's just not my thing.
yeah, no, it's fine. I think I also like, knew their hardcore bands before they were in, Fall Out Boy.
Sure.
That I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I really liked Race Trader. I really liked these bands that they were in. That were good bands, and so I'm like, oh yeah, cool, good for them, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm always happy when people make their money. I'm like, good,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you know, art,
Having worked in the industry for a decade and a half, like, I hate the term sellout, like, do what
sure,
cash in. When you're there, cash in, and then do
yeah.
what you want for the rest of your life.
I mean, I grew up very much like a very much a Ian MacKaye Discord Fugazi acolyte of being like, shows should only be $5 and CDs should only be $8, and your record should be $10, whatever it is, and just being like, music should be accessible, and it should be cheap, and it should be um without the corporate interference, and there's bands I love that are obviously like major label bands and sellout bands, and I like Green Day as much as the next guy or whatever, and I like whoever, but I am also like, it is funny to be an adult and be like, yeah, I work for like Warner Brothers and Walt Disney, and like, I know people from the music scene who are like, yeah, it's so cool that you're still doing like such a punk DIY thing, and I'm like, my checks say Warner Brothers on them, man. I work for AT&T, like, it's not so DIY punk. I'm sorry. Like, and
I mean
I had to come to terms with it. It's not something that came easy to me, for sure.
we all did. Around 2000 was really when the industry the industry as I was in it, just completely
Sure.
flipped. That was the Clear Channel movement. They bought all the shed venues,
Of
and
course.
then it got utterly corporatized. And I would say up until that point, it was a hell of a lot of fun, and then not so much.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had the same experience a lot of like, I was putting out records, and we were putting out records, and right in the rise of the Napsters and LimeWires and those things, where it's just like, oh, you go to a town and you're like, we maybe sold 3 records in this town, but there's 80 kids in this town who know that every word, like, okay, like, and you can kind of make peace with that. And then when it flipped to iTunes, I was like, nope, this is a different thing. Like, this is not even like, I could justify torrent sites and whatever, just being like, it's tape trading and I hope these kids show up to the show and buy a shirt and pay it,
Right.
and buy the record, buy it on vinyl. I hope they do. And then when I was like, oh, it's just iTunes and it's just like all the money's going to Apple and your cover art is just a little thing and now no one feels compelled to buy it and it's just this whole other thing. And that was iTunes, that was pre-Spotify, and I was just like, yeah, this is not the thing I liked. This isn't making and you had to figure out different revenue streams, and I got completely burned out, and that's actually my origin story in comics, is that like I called a bunch of friends who had record labels and was like, how do you stay in love with music? Because I'm starting to hate it. And people are like, oh, I don't love music. Like my friends who ran record labels were like, I don't listen to music in my spare time. I listen to music for work and then I don't listen to music. And that terrified me.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awful.
And the first time someone said that, I was like, oh, you should get a new job. And then by the third time a different person who worked at a record label said that to me, I was like, oh, there's something really terrible going on here. Like people are in a relationship with this thing that they came to because they loved and they've grown to hate it. And I didn't want to hate music, but also didn't want to do something that I didn't love. And so I was like, well, what is the only thing I like as much as music? And it's comics. I've loved comics my whole life. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm going to figure out how to make comics. And, uh, you know, I feel very blessed because I love comics as much today as I did, as an 8-year-old, as much as I did when I first was like, I want to make comics for a living. Like I've never, and I see people get beaten down on it. I meet so many retailers and comics press and readers even, and definitely creators who are just like, yeah, I don't really read that many comics anymore. And that's heartbreaking to me. But I read comics every single night. I love comics so much and I find it very fulfilling. And so I'm happy that I made the right choice and didn't almost run my only other passion into the ground with me alongside music. But it's tricky. It's tricky to stay in love with the stuff and be passionate when there's so many like sea changes for what the industry is and for what your relationship to that is.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to keep a true north with it because I, of course, grew up with comics. My first 3 jobs were in comic book shops.
Mhm.
Then dropped out of school, went on the road, did that whole thing, then became the parent and, I was out of it for a decade plus there.
Sure.
And then it was just really the illness that got me back in it. And then coming out of that illness, it was the only thing that, well, there were a few things, but it's definitely one of the things that kept me alive because
Yeah.
I was trapped in this body that was absolutely failing me, but comics were the thing at the end of the day that every single day I could look forward to and I could get
Yeah.
out.
100%.
So, as long as I lock onto that and whatever I'm doing, I relate back to it, I'm
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I feel like that. I feel, a lot of people, and I don't say it, I feel bad because I don't have this. It's not a prescription I can give people, but people, I have a lot of friends who are like, yeah, even when things are really tough, you're like pretty even keeled guy. Like you're pretty like, and definitely like the things I care about and the things I love are the reason. Like they keep, like you said, like they're a true north for me. That I'm just like, yeah, no matter how shitty the day is, like getting to at the end of the day, be like, oh, I'm gonna go grab a book off the shelf and read some comics is like, that's my peace. That's to me like, a great comic makes a shitty day a good day at the end of it for me. And I know it isn't that way for a lot of people. And I wish I could be like, this is the prescription to having a more calm, a better way to deal with your stresses and your difficulties. And I don't have that prescription, but for me it works.
Well, don't stop putting your recommendations, those threads that you put together out, because even though I'm the editor in chief of a comics journalism outfit now, like I miss things. And I found self-help through that mechanism of you just
Mhm.
kind of posting what you were reading. It's a great book. So don't stop doing
Yeah.
it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I I feel like it's such a funny thing because I grew up I grew up with a comic shop on my corner, and I didn't have friends who read comics. It was just I would go to the comic shop and get comics, and it's always been a solitary thing. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's so like works for me is because it's always been like my solitary fallback position has been comics. But uh, I didn't grow up with any community of comics, and now uh, I find, you know, but my career started in the heyday of Twitter and comics Twitter, and that was really helpful. And people were talking about comics all the time, and that's not what those spaces are for anymore. And people don't want to talk about that stuff in those spaces. And I think it's really damaging, not just comics, but anything you care about. Like that, we don't find these spaces to talk about the things we care about. We don't find these spaces to talk about, you know, the movies we love and the TV we love and the books we love and the records we love. And you know, I love to do that in a public forum because people are like it. One, hope it encourages other people to do it, but also like, yeah, it's a nice reminder that like the comics are out there and that they're impacting people. And yeah, I don't know. I try and always just sort of broadcast stuff I've been enjoying.
Yeah. Well, everyone knows the drill. Let's keep Matthew in the business and encouraged to to keep putting out more stuff. So make sure you get the orders in, call your shops. We're taking everyone down with us. It's another promising debut. To me, feels very topical of the moment in time in which we find ourselves, especially with AI. Plus, it's real pretty. So,
It's real
and it's
great.
funny. Although
Yeah.
I didn't do a great job of illustrating
No,
how
no, you
funny it
did
was.
good. You did great. I came in and said it has jokes in it, so that should be all anyone needs to know that it's funny.
I mean, people who listen to me regularly, they know what they're in for. So, you know,
Sure.
it's all good. Well, Matthew, thanks for hanging out with me today on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. This is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Getty, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.